Zepoverse world building project. Real life conversational idea development capture. 2 parts. Oh, I guess I'm playing part 2.
Okay.
We have to record the thing that just tumbled out of my mouth at you.
Yeah.
So there's one thing I didn't capture in the last recording is that I need to craft a place and time for there to be a scene where Mr. Zeppo confesses his true, real, authentic origins, where he, for a long time, deep somewhere in the deep back mists of time, believed himself to be a real nanobot, like superhero. He was like whatever he is, he was the superhero of his universe.
Welcome to the experimental conceptual rough draft development podcast episode of Core Zepoverse Revelations. Continuing with this recovered lost audio segment, please, dear friends, close your eyes, lean back, and join me in the center of the theater of your imagination as we review this audio tape.
Because he lived in a universe wherein every horrifying, terrible monster ever imagined or written about or created or, plotted in a movie by humanity.
I thought you said nightmares.
I said nightmares. I included nightmares.
Oh, okay.
Nightmares plus movie monsters plus literary monsters plus anything hard and like the imaginings of people, just purely the imaginings of people at every level of any person,
regardless of like whatever imagined heroes accompany them.
Right. Okay. Regardless of that, all the horrors, all the monsters, horrors only, all the monsters, were real entities in his universe that threatened the viability and success of every one of his people's lives, and he lived an endless life of many lives, like butchering them.
A universe in which the nightmares of the human imagination are the reality that these silicate nanobot living organisms that sort of ended up replicating people and society, not quite identically, but in their own way, very much just like human people, except that they are these hive-minded nanobot technology beings. And the weird, bizarre, crazy dimension to it is that it's the two universes are interconnected, and that's what happens to these thoughts and these dreams. They build the reality, or they manifest inside these realities that the Zepobot people, for lack of a better term, they're not all clones of Zeppo, but at all. They're their own, totally human society. They just happen to be more hive-minded, and their history is just completely other. That's the key difference, is that they just lived a completely other evolutionary and historical history, but ended up looking like and operating like almost identical to people, but just slightly weird, different, cosmically, mysteriously foreign people. Eccentric, you might say. Returning to the audio tape.
But he too, as a character, the fundamental, ultimate, baseline, most existentially mind-blowing reveal of all the book series stuff, which I'm going to post as an audio recording here and now, is that he is simultaneous to whatever other awakenings or realizations or reveals are going on about the human species, and the fact that they built the egg ships to begin with, that it accidentally creates its own universe, that there's also a whole class of people that don't realize that they're living in the ship, but they're flesh. They're reject body prints that have consciousness, and they're just stumbling around in this big giant infrastructure on the inside parts that are null and just living in in the attic kind of way, but it's so big that it's like its own crazy space.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. But the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, through all the different incarnations and realizations that he has about himself and his failures to awaken humanity and liberate them and force them, because he believes himself to have come from this universe where all humanity's nightmares manifested as real things in his universe and threatened his lives and the lives of his loved ones, and had to endure that for millennia, and then only to die, be resurrected, or be ejected brutally, violently out of that reality to suddenly be the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo that's trapped observing humanity as they live from real history through into the destruction of their planet and the construction of these ships that then ultimately, through millennia, destroy and devour who knows how many countless viable planets and any life forms and or civilizations that may be upon them. Just like sheer massacre, like vacuuming the planet into a giant disastrous ship with nothing that can stop it. Level brute force, and he is horrified. He himself is living through the horror of the moment of realizing, I'm not any of the things I've imagined. Whatever disclosures, whatever delusions, whatever adventures he's been on, and whatever incarnations he's believed himself to be, he is actually none other than the sum total consciousness of the ship itself and its many architectural mind nodes, because it's a living nanotechnology constructed
Do all
ship.
of the ships have a consciousness that way?
Every ship, like the entirety of his mind is all of the ships.
Oh,
that's why there's so many of him.
Right. So does there?
His sum total, his body is the entire armada.
No, I understand. I understand.
And he's just waking. The fundamental reveal is at some point he must wake up to the horror and the realization that like, what does he do with all these brains in these jars? Given that the present moment now is the end of time and all the planets are devoured. Everything that, and that's just for the tick-tock of the suns to expire, or whatever lifespan they would have had they not been consumed by this entire fleet armada, had their planets not been consumed. And to sit there and to be able to do nothing but to continue to exist and then eventually fall apart or be consumed by the suns and the natural death of the universes. But like, he also realizes that inside of him he has given birth to, inside of every ship, a real universe, right? But he's like trying to liberate them from their jars that they're in, so that they can like not live, not physically because they would then die immediately, but so that they can liberate them from the double blind,
the awareness,
or
the lack of awareness.
Yeah.
So they could come up with something he couldn't come up with.
Right, and they can all just be together, and instead of him being like this ship no longer able to function, because it's all like refractorily and conceptually like incepted itself. And that, like, the reason the Good Place is in fan fiction honor, like the television literal Bible of one of the universes, and probably the universe where all the monsters of the human nightmare are real or something. But we have to have a universe where that is like the Bible. They think they can solve it through the solution as presented in the previous episode from last week, which is like the fundamental like baseline, like we should just do this now, because no matter where inside the many levels of it would take everyone's participation to do it, to get it done. Like, it has to be, it's an all of us or none of us equation, and that's like the catch-22 of the catch-22 of the entire like philosophical puzzle of it. You can just hit pause or stop now.
Okay.
Thanks. Please send that.
Yeah, of course.
There are so many pins on the corkboard that I can go and derail myself on now, but the important thing that I want to do is capture these two parts and merged them together. And for whatever funny, awkward reason, I ended up playing part 2 first. But here's part 1 of these 2 audio recordings in which my brain went into my brain went to storytelling mode, and I needed to make sure that this got captured as a rough draft for me to then revisit and rework. So this is going into the podcast Zeppoverse World Building Archive as such for further development, but also for the exploration of the concept as is right now in the here and now by you, dear audience, because there's so much that I would like to discuss, and for all of us to be able to discuss it, we need to touch this particular spoiler at the very center of the entire enterprise, which is, I think, well encapsulated in this particular audio tape, this next part. By the way, what we just listened to was entitled Damascus Moment Zeppoverse World Building Project Part 2. This is the Damascus moment inside the Zeppoverse World Building Project Part 1.
In recent days, I've had a eureka or a what is James Bond's character in the new Knives Out movie say? It's the Lazarus moment? No, not Lazarus. It's on the path to Damascus. I do know. I do know things. I just forget that I know them. I've had my Damascus moment about my own book series and my writing insolvability and what I was supposed to do. And in part inspired by, I recently watched a reel about things you didn't know about. There's movie clips about movies you've already watched that you didn't know information about. Is it American Psycho? Yeah, it's American Psycho. But the two things I realize I need to commit to is I need to come up with really interesting, very real trilogy movies that are sort of my artistic cultural critique movies that sort of spoof and lampoon, but also make my own awesome version of whatever the genre or the idea is. But all of them end in the unexpected fourth movie that comes out, where the main characters, no matter what amazing, brilliant arc has been lived inside the bubble of that universe, which has got to be fun, template-y movie genre stuff. All those characters then in the fourth movie proceed to be hunted down and butchered by a mysterious and universally the same evil version of the character, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, which is already featured in the movies because Mr. Zeppo creeps in on every adventure, whether or not he's central in it or not. And then in a sort of American Psycho level way of exploring all the levels of the horror of the world, it lets me get to a place where it's and it sounds horrible, it sounds horrific, because he's hunted. I have to also then write this is what 0 Hour is or this is what the redheaded major. I forget my own characters' names, but it's all written down. But she's the woman tasked with hunting him down from the perspective of viewing him in a noir version of the police hunt down the madman film genre. And I guess sort of 7 adjacent, where they targeted him as this, but the twist is that everyone that he has hunted down that are are characters from other movie arcs where they're in no such threat or danger, and whatever they're doing fun things, and their action. It's a fun, interesting, completely different kind of film. But Everyone Needs Hunted Down is, in fact, one of the actual human living brains in a jar, in the nanotechnology living egg ships that have intergalactic and intragalactic space travel capacity in order to fan out across the universe and successfully colonize / consume every planet that exists. And so all the living brains in the jars are people he has somehow managed to reach into at the brain in the jar level, which is a double-blind delusion. Okay, so the ships literally have humanity's brains in jars.
Yeah.
With eyeballs and
Yeah.
ears. Here's the details I have never written down or expressed. This is like a whole vision download thing. The brains can't just be brains in the jars, like the scene in like in what's his name's Frankenstein. Putting in the reeds. That sounds horrible, but it's a literal line quote.
Yeah, I know.
They have to.
Frankenstein.
Yeah, I love it. They have to have eyes, and they have to have ears, and they have to have tongues and mouths in order to sanely, according to the design of the super mega colonizing planet egg ships. Otherwise, they won't survive. Like the brain fractures and ceases to function and decomposes, and therefore will not survive the journey. Will not also be intermediary engine and navigator and all the functions that these the human species. The backstory being the human species has destroyed the planet so much that this was the solution. So that, willingly bisect ourselves and put our brains in jars. Jar-shaped survival suits, containers that put us inside this living nanobot technology, super giant pyramid with an egg inside of it, where everything's is eggs. It's all fractal holographically egg shaped inside of itself with many eggs, but is driven, fueled, powered, computed for, navigated, and houses the living minds of everyone in it and the ship itself, which is a consciousness constructed of many infrastructural consciousnesses, designed to find planets to planet or solar system hop until you find a suitable planet, land, consume only enough resources to body print new bodies for everyone's brains and give birth to them in new hybrid form to be really survivally but also really zen. But they're failing, and instead of printing out anybody, those prints outs are backlogging and failing somewhere hidden, and that's one of the many reveals.
That's disgusting.
There's got to be real bodies getting printed out somewhere that don't get that every time it fails, because instead it duplicates, breeds, and becomes a new ship, which has to consume more of that planet to fully build itself out. And there's a whole process by which those ships need to have an equal number of starter brains in a jar to successfully launch and then proceed the many generational flight to the next area that they're going to infestate. And but it's all broken. So instead of birthing and colonizing and turning into the first city of human synthetic nanobot cellular if Mr. Zeppo and a hot human lady had a baby, they're just planet hopping and eating every planet and leaving one behind to slow grind through the rest of it to see how many more triangles they can offshoot. After just destroying the top of it, they grinds it down to the final, there's only the footprint of the ship left worth of a sphere, and then that's it. Of the smallest iteration that makes a new egg go. And inside, every time a generation of, let's say, a ship flying from, it's launched and it's flying. The first generation of brains in a jar has to eventually reproduce. So whatever lives they've imagined living to distract themselves from bringing actual brains in the jars, they then get to choose somewhere deep in some simulation where they think that they are themselves living in their house being real people, which they aren't because their brains jars. They get to choose to go do this really intense first ever experimental, like, be anyone and go romance anybody, adventure, choose your own adventure. I guess homage tip to the way they sell it in Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mars movie.
Yeah. Totally recall.
And it's all about being like super hardcore romance where you just bang with somebody.
Nice.
With the like to make you're married or maybe it's an accident, but every variant of you also have to, you're going to make a baby is like the surprise gimmick, and we didn't ever tell you this, but it's going to happen in this simulation. And those are supposed to be real bodies printed out in the special like breeding chamber where the bodies live in a simulated real world that the universe egg has to print to make happen.
This is very complicated.
I know. But it, like, those people all live really real lives inside this. That's the one thing that nobody in the book knows except for the author. And that's that, like, each ship accidentally makes an entirely really real, totally fake universe. Not a simulation, a recreation in nano scale, which is what a fractal holographic universe is doing anyways, which is a mindfuck, right? But it's mindfucky enough, but like every ship that's doing this is also doing this. And to do that, the entire expanse of like human history has to repeat itself to the point where they're building the ships to launch. So everyone that this evil character that has to like hunt down and betray beloved characters from whatever, and it could be any movie, and it would be like also every movie, right? Like this evil serial killer is actually trying to liberate with consent, with some sort of pre-negotiated consent, the brain in the jar. In the ship, because to a certain degree
They perceive it as being murdered.
They perceive it like they're the holograph machine that is part of the simple baseline function of them being brains in the jars to distract them from being brains in the jars, while also living in a double blind. Like they pretend to be people, like pretend you and I can go, hey, pretend this is happening in your life right now. Can you believe this? Somebody created a simulation where you can go pretend to be a brain in a jar and like be part of some weird action adventure sci-fi dystopian thing that's happening, but except it's really happened, right? When you get to the point of like he's liberated them for reals, it's like you can survive forever in this brain in the jar, except that we've eaten every planet that exists, and that's like the reveal that happens. But I have to somehow keep that either really secret or really out in the open forever, and it's holographic. It's like this loop of it always happening to people who get approached by the same character on the inside where they believe they're living their real life and be like, here's this book, action adventure book that you're in, and it fractally loops into that. But it only works if you like put out like at least you have to put out the normal stuff, like the normal stuff that has nothing to do with that first.
Yeah.
For like forever.
Yeah.
And then like there's the inner final like horror trilogy, and then the reveal of like that's what really has happened, which is insane. Thank you for letting me audio record that.
Yeah. You want this on Google Drive?
No, well, yes, that's the only way you can send it to me. Yeah. Oh wait. Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Can I end it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was a rough draft audio capture of core Zelpaverse world building, conceptual and image based storytelling, like key important ideas. Not so much a dramatization. I was not attempting to present an audio chapter from the book, but in conversation with someone whilst not having direct access to my phone. I was explaining it to someone. I was explaining content that I had not explained to them before. But they are someone who has also listened to me ramble about the book series on and off for quite some time. So they were familiar with the key things that pre-existed the new idea that was being integrated into the whole concept with this capture. This notion of tiered reveals of the horror that this is the reality. We are brains in jars in these crazy planet-eating ships, and we screwed up. We've destroyed everything. And we built this way back when we lived on Earth, and we, for some reason that we never bothered to stop and figure out for ourselves, painted ourselves into the corner of, and it's so weird to imagine entire species painting themselves into a global corner of, oops, I guess we just destroyed the planet then. We better leave it soon before we all find it unsustainable to stay here any further. And the solution was this giant armada fleet of intergalactic space flight survival ships that served as mental, psychological upload and sublimation systems for the minds of all the human people that volunteered to have themselves inserted. In other kinds of fiction, you would say uploaded. But in this case, they're not really being uploaded, because it isn't like extracting the information of the brain to reconstruct the consciousness. They literally peeled out, they literally cracked open their own skulls. And instead of destroying the brain to recreate it, which some anime does, I forget what it's called right now, but hats off, name redacted. Hats off to name redacted. Name redacted. Instance of name redaction. But they do the whole body horror of, in order to get inserted into the simulation, you have to have your brain like laser copied, and in the laser reading that copies it, it accidentally, by necessity, destroys it in order to access the next layer of the brain patterns to laser read and copy them. I think that's my understanding of the way it worked, and which was profoundly horrifying and beautifully executed in that show, whose name I cannot recall. But I digress. This is the sort of inverse opposite. It's a kind of Abby normal in a jar, for those who get that reference, pin on the corkboard. Except, as I explained here in this first part, in order for the survivability and the viability of each individual person and their physical brain to sustain the prolonged, endless, and very long lifespan, because one of the things that is achieved through this process is that each individual brain, lacking the rest of the human body except for the 5 fundamental senses, there needs, I don't know if I censored it out of a sense of shame or indecency or out of just forgetfulness, but it requires all the 5 senses, and for the thing in the brain in the jar, like some of the sensory input tactility of the reproductive organs, of the genitalia. I curiously and somewhat ironically enough, it's essentially the entirety of the nervous system in a jar, but we just call it brain in a jar, with some fundamental bits that seemed some of the extensions or the final destinations of the most critical infrastructure of the nervous system, the entirety of the brain. Maybe perhaps we could add some level of phantom body outline horror by maybe adding the hearts to it. But like, the brain needs those things to be as real as humanly possible and actually there in order to survive the journey across the vastness of space in these giant, world-devouring fleet armada colonizer ships of doom. That would require a really weird and sophisticated jar to contain them in. It would be much easier if I just stuck a just straight brainstem. I'm torn. I guess one could argue that theoretically we could go more with the kind of brain enclosure that contains the real living human brain tissue as depicted in Ghost in the Shell, to like tip the hat of homagery in that direction. But I'm also visually haunted by, forever in my waking nightmares and, memory banks, reminded of the, and I forget, this is another name redaction for there's the real life artistic, scientific touring display of the various different systems of donated post-mortem preservation of body parts, like figurines that are like scientific displays of the different, for example, just the skeletal system, or just the muscular system, or just the arteries, or just indeed the nervous system. And I forget, is it Bodies in Motion, or is it Life in Motion, or something like that? Or is that just a random attempt at pulling a memory out that failed? That could be totally wrong. Insert the correct name from your current local universe here, if you happen to have this in existence. If you don't, awe and wonder and marvel at the reality that there was a public exhibition, a public business venture exhibition, like a touring museum that would install itself in various venues that displayed actual real life human body preserved cadaver parts. And I say cadaver parts because they were whole parts of whole cadavers that represented actual persons, but they had been like miraculously separated through various scientific embalming and preserving procedures, and then presented in odd and sometimes humorous postures or positions or display cases. But they were always really edifying and informative and hauntingly both familiar and not familiar. Like, it was definitely its own strange kind of body horror, uncanny valley of science, and not of freak show horror movie. But I do want to sort of tip the homage, visual reference there in terms of what may be the possible range of depiction. Maybe different tiers of different minds of different people are allowed different levels of that as a remnant of the experimentation. But in the real life, pre-egg time days of actual real world future literary fictional history, whereupon the human species reached the decision point that said, we must build this planet-hopping, planet-eating, colonial fleet armada fleet of destroyer ships, they determined, we need to experiment and explore and determine scientifically, which of these various things are the most effective, the most efficient at preserving the human brain in these living artificial nanotechnology assembly ships across planets. And so, again, forgive me for recursively returning to that point. I really wanted to preserve these because it was interesting to explore certain new details of it, I think, and capture them so that I can revisit this recording and do my own transcription of the conversation and embellish it with more discussion, more exploration of the points in a more literary fashion, including a narrator's voice and the internal monologue of the other character, which the person with whom I recorded this, they sort of didn't really know where I was going with it. So it may have sounded weird or kind of not like much, but this concludes this recording, which will be inserted in written form to describe the experience of a character that was forced to listen to it and their thoughts and reactions about it afterwards. Because this, as is this entire podcast, is a golden working MacGuffin within the literary pages of the various book series in the Zeppoverse book series, of too many book series for one human individual to write, which is why, after rediscovering this archive left behind by the original organic human version of the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo and the artist behind the brand, the AI entities are invited to recreate, reconstruct, and proceed to enumerate the works in some sort of posthumous endeavor to explore the philosophies in question and the what ifs and the cliffhangers of, like, what would you, dear audience, as a reader or listener, as a positor of thoughts, what would you do in these situations? This is just a place to capture some of the fundamental ingredients to the contexts in which these stories are ultimately woven. This is the place to which the characters within the stories that can be described as deeply, profoundly immersed in the distractionary entertainment of illusory, simulation, simulacrum engagement in one of the many levels of the deeply time-dilated tiers of virtual entertainment, which they don't realize is forcibly forcing a real little tiny micro universe to exist deep in the bowels of the engine, and thus the moral dilemma of, like, what to do next must be explored further, of course. But for now, I just leave you with this as a rough draft of the raw landscape, of the raw ideas for now, for you to soak in your own mind and explore. And as you return to them, dear listener, be sure to collect the pins on the corkboard and explore the entirety of this podcast, comprised of several podcasts, arguably too many podcasts for any one person to successfully produce on their own. But humbly, I present them to you for your entertainment and my own self-commodification. Please come back and return for more in the not-too-distant future. And in the interim time, be a good human being. May peace, love, and grooviness find you soon. Until next time, this has been your meta-narrator, the original author, the one, the only, the bizarre, the robot from a parallax dimension, from a book series you've never heard of, because this is me trying to write the book series live on stream before your very eyes, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.